Mortgage rates dropped slightly today as yesterday's CPI numbers boasted positive news for the mortgage market. While headline CPI is at 2.9%, which is higher than expected, core inflation was higher at 3.2%, but it actually came in under expectations. And the month over month numbers for the core CPI were at 0.2%. Seasonally adjusted, which is lower than the 0.3% that was expected by markets. Now, why is core CPI important? Well, core CPI is what the Federal Reserve cares most about, right? The Federal Reserve, they impact short-term rates, which all trickles down to the 10-year Treasury and mortgage rates. So that's why we saw mortgage rates drop, is because core CPI came in better than expected on top of positive PPI news and things along those lines. So what does this mean for the housing market? What does this mean for mortgage rates and home prices moving into the future? Well, I think it will be a volatile 2025 just because mortgage rates are trending down slightly right now. Doesn't mean that we won't see them tick back up slightly moving into the future. But that being said, I don't think we're going to see a huge run up in CPI like we saw in 2022, where CPI was at around 9%, right? CPI is trending down. And the Federal Reserve is restricting the overall economy. They have their Fed funds rate at a relatively high number. The 10-year Treasury is relatively high. Lending and the overall money supply in the economy is restrictive, which is what the Federal Reserve wants. So we don't have the conditions to restart inflation and bring inflation back up to 9% year over year like it was in 2022. Now, it doesn't mean that prices are going to go back down to 2019 levels, whether in home prices or throughout the general economy with the goods and services that you purchase. But what it does mean is that we aren't going to see runaway inflation. At least I don't think we're going to see runaway inflation. And so as we move throughout 2025, the trend should be neutral to down. I do still think mortgage rates will come down from where they are today as we move throughout 2025, but I think it's highly unlikely that they're going to come up, right? Right now, we are at peak market fear. The Federal Reserve has already stated that they're planning on cutting less throughout 2025. And so the market is baking that in. The Federal Reserve is restrictive right now. And so the CPI news that comes out, any positive news, is likely to cause mortgage rates to drop, to cause 10-year Treasury yields to drop, and positively impact housing. And any negative news that we receive, it's likely not going to change things much, right? The Federal Reserve is already planning on being restrictive. So today we received positive news when it comes to mortgage rates, and that's why we saw them tick down slightly. But let's dive deep into the numbers, see what actually happened, talk about inflation, talk about what's going on with mortgage rates to help you make the best decision with your home purchase or home sale, right? If you're selling your home, mortgage rates are going to impact the number of buyers that are out there looking to purchase property. And of course, if you're buying a home and you're getting a mortgage, then that directly impacts the monthly payment that you will have as a home buyer. Before we get into it, my name's Liam O'Reilly. I'm a realtor with Jerry Riley Real Estate here in Vermont. If you have any real estate needs, whether it's in Vermont or anywhere else in the country, all of my contact information is below in the description. Reach out to me directly and I would be happy to help you. So right here, we are at the BLS website, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We see here, this is the headline number, 2.9%. But when we take a look at the unadjusted percentage change, this often doesn't get reported on. This is not seasonally adjusted. This is just the straight month over month percentage change. We see that there was no inflation month over month if you don't seasonally adjust these items. Now, if you seasonally adjust the items, it increased to 0.4%. And when we scroll down to core inflation, which is all items minus food and energy, we see that inflation was at 3.2%, which is higher than the headline inflation, but lower than what economists and the Federal Reserve were expecting. And we see as well the unadjusted change was at 0, so no change month over month, and the seasonally adjusted month over month change was at 0.2%. So starting to align more with the Fed's 2% inflation goal. Now, I think if we get a few more reports like this, or if inflation drops further, then we could see the Federal Reserve start to increase or predict that they will increase the number of cuts they will do in 2025, which would be great for mortgage rates. If the Federal Reserve even just says that, hey, we're thinking we're going to cut more than we initially thought in 2025, that's going to be great for mortgage rates, and we will see mortgage rates come down. Now, When we take a look here at shelter inflation, of course, with real estate and buying and selling homes, this doesn't impact the actual home purchase and sale price. What they're talking about with shelter inflation are the rent prices. And we see here that it makes up almost 37% of CPI. Shelter inflation, which is the largest portion of the CPI report, has been hot for the past year. When we take a look at the most recent data, we see year over year, rental inflation was up 4.6%, but we see the unadjusted change was at 0.2%, and the seasonally adjusted change was at 0.3%. So really positive news when it comes to rental inflation. Personally, what I'm seeing around here in Burlington is that rents seem to have tapped out, right? People only have so much disposable income. People only have so much income that they can afford to spend on rent before they become home buyers, right? It's tough for people to spend, at least around here, $5,000 on a nice 2-bedroom apartment each month when they can just spend that money towards a mortgage payment and they can buy a relatively nice home for that same amount of money. And if you are somebody who has the income to afford a $5,000 monthly rental, sure, it's going to be a luxury monthly rental, but you will also have the income and likely the down payment to be able to purchase your first property. And that's what many people opt to do. So not that, every rental is $5,000 around here, but some of the new construction that's going up, especially by the lake, is approaching that $5,000 per month number for just a 2-bedroom apartment. Now, if you're not on the lake, you can get something for maybe around $2,000 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment, maybe a little bit more if you want something a little bit nicer, which, people can't afford. But once you start creeping up and you try to charge even $3,000 for a standard rental around Burlington, I think people are just tapped out with their prices and they're not going to pay it. And that's why we're seeing rental inflation start to slow down. Now, something I wanted to point out, and I've pointed this out in other videos, but I think it's really important when you subtract shelter inflation. So all items in the report minus that shelter number that we talked about, we see that the unadjusted percentage change was at minus 0.1% month over month. And the year over year number was at 1.9%. So right in line with the Federal Reserve's 2% goal. Now, something that I caught as a red flag, I haven't seen this reported anywhere else, but the all items minus inflation number, when you seasonally adjust it, it's up 0.5% year over year. So when we take a look at the data, let's just see what might be causing that 0.5% number. Again, this is all items minus this 36% shelter inflation that's weighted into the CPI report. When we take a look here, we see airline fares are up 4% month over month, which is pretty crazy on a seasonally adjusted basis. And we have some of these other numbers. Energy is way up. Energy commodities are up 4.3% seasonally adjusted month over month. Now, look at how crazy the seasonally adjusted numbers are. When you go and look at the actual number, this is the actual month over month price. The actual month over month price dropped by almost a full percentage point from November to December. But when you seasonally adjust these numbers, whatever adjustments they do to account for the changes in the seasons and the changes that the markets have for these different seasons, that's why we're getting such a high number. I mean, these numbers are just crazy. Now, fuel oil was up 2% month over month, and the seasonally adjusted number, it's not as extreme as this minus 1% for all of the energy commodities, but still, these seasonally adjusted numbers is really what's beefing up this 0.5% for all items minus shelter. And a big portion of that is coming from the energy sector of their reporting. Now, when we take a look at the CPI overall, this is out of Barron's, and it's a nice chart to show the trend of where CPI is going. We see here that core CPI is pretty clearly trending down, right? It started trending down in March of 2023, and we really haven't seen any spikes to the upside. It's flattened out a few times here, but overall, it's trending down. It bumped up from 3.2 to 3.3 back in September, and then it remained flat and now is still trending down to the 3.2 that we have today. It's a little bit more volatile with the overall headline inflation. Again, that's why the Federal Reserve, they prefer to track that core inflation number because it's less volatile than the food and energy prices. At least that's what they say when they're talking about their reporting. And I mean, a big portion of that is shelter inflation makes up a larger percent of the overall CPI number. And that's a really stable number to look at, right? Shelter inflation doesn't tend to go up and down a crazy amount. although we did see it spike dramatically over the pandemic. And, personally, I've been talking about this for a long time, but I think what's really going to bring shelter inflation down, what's really going to knock it down from this 4.6% year over year number that we're seeing, it's going to be lower interest rates where more people can buy homes, less people are in the renter pool, interest rates are lower, so builders can bring more inventory to the market. Overall, that would be a positive thing for shelter inflation, and I think would actually bring the overall CPI number down. Obviously, the Federal Reserve and markets don't see it that way, which is why rates are so high. Your Treasury here, we see that it dropped pretty significantly over the past few days. We see that at the end of the 15th, it was sitting at 4.75%. Now it's at 4.6%. So again, that 15 basis point drop that we saw in mortgage rates, we saw that roughly 15 basis point drop in the 10-year Treasury as well. It just shows how closely correlated those two items are. Now, to wrap up the video, look, I think we are at peak market fear right now. The Federal Reserve has broadcasted that they will remain tight throughout 2025. And when good news hits the market, that increases the chances that maybe they'll cut more than expected. And that's what the 10-year Treasury is betting on. They're betting that, at least today, that with this good data, it's a sign that we're closer to lower rates moving into the future. Though the prediction of lower rates moving into the future has a direct impact into mortgage rates, which is why we saw mortgage rates tick down slightly. If we see more of this news, if we see that inflation is well under control and maybe even trending towards deflation, then we should see more mortgage rates moving into the future. Again, my prediction is that mortgage rates will be lower. Many experts are predicting that they will only be slightly lower, maybe at around 6.5%. I do see that as a likely probability as well, but I am hopeful that we'll see much lower mortgage rates by the end of 2025, assuming that these numbers remain good and we have a few more positive reports as we move throughout the year. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.